for Peace and Prosperity. Now, for this plenary session, under the theme Overcoming Legacies of the Past, Promoting Reconciliation and Peace in the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia, we'll be joined by His Excellency Jose Ramos Horta, former President of Timor-Leste and the Nobel Peace Laureate in 1996, for a special lecture and a dialogue. So now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Jose Ramos Horta, former President of Timor-Leste, for the special lecture. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to be again in Korea and in such hopeful times. My last trip here was in November last year, and it coincided with the visit of the US President. I am a frequent visitor to the Republic of Korea. I've been here countless times over the past 2 decades, and may I say I'm reasonably familiar with the country and people. Your achievements over the last 30 years have been extraordinary, rapidly progressing from humiliating impoverishment to the proud ranks of the world's economic powers, scoring outstanding performance in innovation, science, technology, medicine, arts, and diplomacy. Above all, the Republic of Korea is one of the world's most vibrant democracies, with an independent and inquisitive media, an informed and vigilant civil society, and an uncompromising judiciary, all bedrocks of a true democracy. But while you live in peace and prosperity, almost anywhere we turn to in the world, any day of the week, we read about violence and death, immense suffering of the innocent, of children and youth, of countries imploding violently along ethnic and religious lines. Over many thousands of years, human beings wage wars, sometimes to satisfy basic needs of survival, as food, water, and land to cultivate food. But oftentimes, wars were or are waged with ambition and the miscalculation of expanding influence and securing even greater gains. This vast region, Northeast Asia, home to 1.5 billion people, Korea, China, and Japan, with an extraordinarily rich history and culture, has known many destructive wars that killed tens of millions of people. Both North and South Korea and virtually every country in the Asia region also know firsthand the tragic consequence of wars, enduring immense suffering caused by centuries of wars unleashed by tyrants and demagogues. My country, Timor-Leste, of a little more than 1 million people, shares with the Korean people a history of war, occupation, and resistance. We survived and prevailed through centuries of colonial rule, and we share with you experience of Japanese occupation. In 2002, we celebrated our freedom when we became the first nation and first new democracy of the millennium. We honor our martyrs and heroes and began the process of looking after the veterans, widows, orphans, and those mutilated by war. We reconciled with our domestic adversaries, those who didn't think and believe like us. For the sake of healing, we rejected an international tribunal to try those who committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. We are at peace with ourselves. We forgave our enemies, enemies in quote, reconciled our nation and reconciled with our neighbors. Slowly, steadily, we are building a peaceful, inclusive, democratic, pluralistic, and fair country for all. I believe the infinite potential of Korea, China, and Japan that can be unleashed to further peace and prosperity only when a truth-telling and truth-finding process is undertaken. There is no denying that Japan was a culprit in the tragic catalogue of wars and occupation. Japanese leaders must do more to teach the full truth to today's and future generations about Japanese aggression against Korea and China and other peoples in Asia. I'm sure the Chinese and Korean peoples would then be able to finally reconcile with Japan. Where there is a failure to courageously and honestly address painful historical legacies, these deep suspicions and animosities will remain and will impede the development of a much more mutually beneficial dynamic partnership amongst the three Northeast Asian economic powerhouses. I will now attempt to summarize the efforts undertaken by leaders of the Republic of Korea to attain the much-cherished dream of peace and reunification among the large divided Korean family. From the moment President Moon Jae-in took office in May 2017, following highly competitive, free and democratic elections, he sought dialogue with the Northern Communist regime to realize the elusive dreams of lasting peace, reconciliation, denuclearization and reunification. They were the same dreams pursued by the late President Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, his past political mentors. He courageously reached out to the dictator in the north, even as tensions were at boiling point, caused by the destabilizing acrimonious exchanges between the North Korean dictator and the US president. President Moon's overtures to the north were widely ridiculed and opposed by domestic and American critics. Deeply religious and committed to peace, President Moon was not discouraged by the hostility of the Trump administration and misgivings conveyed from Tokyo in regard to the entreaties between ROK and DPRK. The mood has changed dramatically, from fear of an imminent war fed by incendiary tweets threatening nuclear annihilation of North Korea by the most powerful country in the world, to one of celebration as a result of the historic summit in Singapore that ended with a statement of intention to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. The Dotar, quote, and the Rocket Man, quote, became instant friends, quote, unquote. The world shouldn't be surprised if we see Trump Towers going up in Pyongyang and the Apprentice series carried in the only state TV channel allowed in DPRK. President Moon is absolutely correct in doing everything in his power in the remaining years in office to pursue the much-cherished dream of a denuclearized Korean peninsula, lasting peace and reunification. This promises to be a long and tortuous process, but the seeds of peace President Moon and his two predecessors, Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, have planted will bear fruit if Koreans stand fully behind this peace process, keep the hope and faith, and refuse to give up in the face of the many obstacles ahead. The peoples of the Korean Peninsula and of the wider region deserve and expect no less from their leaders, who are duty-bound to pursue patient dialogue and explore avenues of cooperation where possible and desirable. As President Moon negotiates with his North Korean counterpart, I am sure he has not forgotten the peoples of DPRK, who for decades have languished under the tyrannical communist dynasty. Hence, fundamental human rights and freedom for all peoples in the Korean Peninsula must be part of the peace process. President Kim Jong-un would send a further message of goodwill if he is to decree the end of arbitrary detention, closure of labor camps, torture and summary executions, and release of political prisoners. If it is true that President Kim Jong-un loved his people as stated by President Trump, then surely he should take steps towards opening up North Korea and allow his people more freedom. He has ample time to initiate and manage a process of incremental change and can go down in history as the architect of gradual evolution from tyranny to a more humane and compassionate political and social regime. Land and history shape us as a people, mold our personality and attitudes. As human beings, we are compelled to adapt to every circumstance in order to survive and thrive, even in the midst of extreme adversity. This process of adaptation shapes us, makes us who we are. And the Korean people, proud, brave, resilient, extremely hardworking and determined, have transformed this land from extreme poverty into a robust, vibrant world economy, from colonial occupation and military dictatorship into an uncompromising democracy. As I stand here, I bow to the memory of all Koreans who lost their lives in the fight for independence against foreign rulers and for democracy and freedom against dictatorship. I bow to the memory of the late President Kim Dae-jung, a man of vision, principles and convictions. Kim Dae-jung was a personal friend and friend of my country. In September 1999, working closely with President Bill Clinton and UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, Kim Dae-jung dispatched a Korean peacekeeping battalion to my country, contributing to end the violence there. I commend the Korean armed forces for their professionalism and bravery in the service of the UN in my country. I am very proud to have nominated Kim Dae-jung for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1999. He was awarded the prize in 2000. I wrote the submission nominating him for the Nobel Peace Prize in a hotel room in Seoul with the help of my friend Han Jung Kim. I later was invited to attend the Oslo ceremony on 10 December 2000 as guest of President Kim Dae-jung. I recall a speech that set all this in motion, the Berlin Old City Hall speech of July 17 by President Moon, when he said, "We need to urgently ease the military tensions on the Korean Peninsula. We need to rebuild the trust that has collapsed between the North and the South." A fundamental solution is to uproot the North Korean nuclear issue. The North Korean nuclear issue has become much more difficult to deal with than in the past. A step-by-step and comprehensive approach is required. The fact that President Moon mentions easing the security and economic concerns of the North is vital. The Korean War, US military presence at its border, NATO orchestration of regime change in Iraq and Libya after the Gaddafi regime gave up its nuclear weapons program are all roots of North Korean regime's obsession with acquiring nuclear weapons capability. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no shortcuts to peace. The road is fraught with man-made obstacles, stemming from individual or collective experiences, perceptions and fears, often exacerbated by personal ambitions and egos of those at the center. Hence, we can all be assured there is not going to be a straight line in the pursuit of durable peace in the Korean Peninsula and beyond. While some first major steps have been taken toward denuclearization and elimination of the threat of war, as President Moon rightly stated, a step-by-step and a comprehensive approach is required. Prevention of conflict and war, dialogue and mediation to settle disputes must be always our preferred options, and when these are actively pursued, creatively and patiently exercised in a timely fashion, they may produce results. To conclude, I dream of the time when the three great countries, China, Korea and Japan, meet at the Golden Bridge of Peace, a bridge decorated with millions of paper cranes, a vision imagined by an innocent victim of the first ever atomic bomb dropped on a people. The victim's name, Sadako. After being diagnosed with leukemia from the atomic radiation, Sadako began to fold origami paper cranes, inspired by the Japanese legend that one who created 1,000 origami cranes would be granted a wish. And Sadako's wish was to live, but he did not survive. I thank you, and God bless you all.
Yes, thank you, Your Excellency, for sharing your valuable insights with us. And now to proceed with the discussion for today, joining former President of Timor-Leste, please welcome Park Jin, President of the Asia Future Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome them with a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Park Jin. I'm the president of Asia Future Institute and the former member of the Korean National Assembly. I'm very delighted to meet with His Excellency, former president of Timor-Leste, Jose Ramos Horta, who gave us a great speech to promote peace and reconciliation, and to introduce a new future for Korea and also the community, regional community that we live in. Now, I'd like to introduce a little bit about His Excellency Horta, about what he has done and what he is doing now, and what is the idea for the future. His Excellency Horta has received Nobel Peace Prize in 1996 for his efforts to establish peace and solve the conflict and move forward. And then he served as the president of the Republic of Timor-Leste from 2007 to 2012. Now, he has demonstrated active and consistent advocacy on human rights, peace building, and mediation by chairing high-level independent panel on UN peace operations at the UN headquarters in New York, and co-chairing independent commission on multilateralism at International Peace Institute, and served as a special representative of the UN Secretary General and head of the UN Integrated Peace-Building Mission in Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. And now, his current positions include Senior Minister, National Security Advisor of the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste since last year, and member of the high-level board on mediation established by the UN Secretary General. Now, we have about 40 minutes for our session, so I'd like to enter into a discussion on major issues which would interest us in the audience, and also we have many young students who are interested in this subject of peace, reconciliation, and the future of our country and the region. After that, I will open the floor for a couple of questions so that His Excellency Horta can answer. Let's start with your impression of Korea. I know you have been visiting our country many times in the past, and I also understand that you had a chance to give lectures at Korean universities and make a visit to the Korean automobile company. What aspect of Korea impressed you most this time, especially in this beautiful island of Jeju?
One thing that always impressed me and struck me about Korea for many, many years, where the country was 30, 40 years ago, what it was in the 60s and the early 70s, extremely poor, recovering from Japanese occupation, the Korea War, and then what it became. You know, Korea doesn't have oil, gas, gold, diamonds. everything that it has today is produced by the brains and the hands of Korean people. And one detail that I watched many years ago, in '97, during the worst financial economic crisis that hit East Asia and Southeast Asia, which tell a lot about how proud Korean people are. You remember when almost every Korean person with a gold ring, an earring, any gold, any property they have at home, they took to the banks and paid the debt that Korea had to the IMF. It was the only country in the world ever that has done that. It shows extraordinary pride of determination, of dignity of a people. So all of this has impressed me enormously, and how Koreans are unforgiving about corruption, how Koreans are deeply suspicious of power, so very intolerant towards minimum signs of political abuse of power. And this is what makes this country great and unique, and I observe all the time.
Thank you. The Korean Peninsula has been divided for more than 7 decades since its liberation from the colonial rule. And this prolonged national division has created the contrasting and mutually hostile two Koreas under the military confrontation. And now we are witnessing a seismic shift in the political landscape on the Korean Peninsula through the inter-Korean dialogue and the efforts to bring in more cooperative relationship through détente and reconciliation. And all this happened ironically because of the security crisis on the Korean Peninsula, the escalating tension caused by North Korea's nuclear threat, and to efforts to transform this crisis into an opportunity to build peace through dialogue and diplomacy rather than confrontations and hostilities. Now, looking at the series of announcements, such as the Panmunjom Declaration and the Singapore Statement, what is your view on the changing situation on the Korean Peninsula, and how do you assess the role of South Korea in the process of this unfolding process of this peace and reconciliation?
It is an interesting case study in the sense that at the U.S. level, at the level of the United States, many of the more dramatic peace initiatives, like normalization of relations between the U.S. and China, for instance, were conducted by a Republican administration. And of course, without discounting, minimizing the role of democratic presidents who attempted to bring peace, for instance, in Middle East. Started with Jimmy Carter, continued with Bill Clinton. But when you look at some chapters of American foreign policy that were dramatic, couldn't be more dramatic than the normalization of relations with China, was initiated by Kissinger and Nixon. And then in the past few years, under Bill Clinton, under Obama, there were always desire on the part of the North Korean leader to meet with the U.S. president. And it was always declined. the US side understood the risks and what was at stake and declined. It took a Republican president, let's call him a Republican president because President Trump doesn't fit in the traditional Republican mold, definition of a Republican, but took someone of his personality to accept a meeting, a summit with President of North Korea without any preparation, really. So that was an exceptional development. But for this to happen, the reality is that it was mediated, really, initiated by President Moon. And in the case of Korea, the Republic of Korea, it's interesting that it is the other way. While in the US, most of the very bold initiatives were started by Republicans, a Republican president. In Korea, all the peace initiatives towards North Korea were started by liberal leaders, Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, and now President Moon. While the more conservative presidents completely oppose any accommodation with North Korea. I'm not making any valid judgment what is wise or wiser, but it seems that finally all the elements are into play that favoring the initiative by President Moon. Because in reality, in my view, there are two key players, North and South. The destiny of this peninsula are in the hands of the leaders of the North and South. But you have neighbors, one is China, and then one remote, but because of its global influence, the US is literally, you can say, a neighbor to everybody. It is present everywhere. And hardly any major situation in the world, conflict, that you can ignore US influence for good or for bad. So you have two key players, China and the United States, but in reality, the fate of this peninsula rests on the two leaders. How to really engage each other, how to build trust and move forward, how to accommodate the interests of China, Japan, the interests of the United States. So as I watch, I'm not an expert on Korea, I'm an expert, I would say, on peacemaking. I'm very impressed with the ability of President Moon in bringing all parties to it, to the point where President Moon said President Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't debate that we leave it to the Nobel Committee in Oslo to one day decide who deserves the Peace Prize. But this dynamic peace process and hopes generated would not have happened without the vision, the courage of President Moon. Similar to what was started by President Kim Dae-jung and followed by Roh Moo-hyun.
Do you think that these efforts to build peace on the Korean Peninsula will come to a successful outcome despite this heavy issue of denuclearization excuse me, of North Korea, because the country is very much obsessed with the possession of this nuclear arsenal to ensure the regime survival. And do you think that these peace-building efforts will come to a successful outcome eventually?
It is very difficult to predict because we don't know the dynamics within North Korea, within the communist regime itself, within the military, how they view these initiatives by President Kim Jong-un, and understanding the dangers, the risks of divisions within North Korea, we cannot discount that. Then all players, Republic of Korea, the US, and Japan, should fully support the Republic of Korea, should be extremely prudent in what they say, what they do, not to cause any setbacks in this difficult process. Because let's not have an illusion that everything is going to happen in a straight line. Probably there will be setbacks. The Singapore summit was cancelled. Then President Moon was the one who appealed to both sides. He talked to the North, put things back on track. And this will happen again and again. The important thing is that President Moon continue to keep US on side, Japan on side, and the other powers that be, like Russia, to support this very unique opportunity, this unique chance. It will be a long while, and the issue of nuclear weapons is one. But then you have the overall situation of human rights in North Korea. How about the people there? The prison camps, summary arbitrary execution, torture. Of course, first things first. I agree with President Moon's approach that he has to deal with the nuclear issue first and create confidence. And then maybe President Kim Jong-un is a young person. He was exposed to other values. This frequent contacts with South probably will encourage him to liberalize the political system in North Korea, not to the point of becoming like the Republic of Korea, maybe expecting too much, but at least he can decree end of torture, end of slave labor camps. How to achieve that? It is going to require a prudent, patient engagement with Kim Jong-un, and hoping that the military in North Korea and the ruling party continue to support him.
I agree with you on your point about the importance of human rights in North Korea, because in a way, this human rights issue has been overshadowed by the nuclear issue in dealing with the Korean Peninsula. If the denuclearization is a solution to solve the symptomatic problem of North Korea, then human rights issue is a systematic problem. It's a fundamental nature of the regime, which should be changed in the future. So I think that your role as an advocate, uncompromising advocate of human rights, and also the role of the United Nations would continue to be very important in helping improving the situation, the human rights situation in North Korea. I'd like to ask you about the region, the Northeast Asian region with Korea, Japan, and China. And you mentioned in your speech about the need to move towards a more harmonious community, despite the territorial disputes and history issues and trade frictions and military tensions and so on and so forth. What are the requirements, in your view, for this region to move towards a more harmonious and also creating a community of mutual interest, a common interest, and shared prosperity? What would be the good way to approach these issues?
I understand from my reading and conversations with Chinese leaders, with South Korean leaders, that the legacy of World War II, of Japanese invasion and occupation, linger on because sometimes of the ambiguities of actions and statements by some in Japan. But allow me to say some words in defense of Japan. You know, more than any country in history, in humanity history, Japan paid enormously for its action during in initiating the war in Asia. The only country that suffered the impact of two atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then, following the war, Japanese leaders, military leaders, were put on trial. The very proud emperors surrender to General MacArthur. The Japanese paid a heavy price for the errors, the crimes of their leaders. They accepted punishment in silence. They rebuilt their country. And when Japan became prosperous in the late 60s, it started helping Asian countries out of poverty. But unfortunately, there are forces in Japan that time and again derail the efforts of some Japanese leaders in reconciling with the rest of the region. So, number one step, there has to be some mechanism whereby the three countries finally put to rest the legacies of World War II. One, in the case of South Korea, the comfort women, sex slave, and that many have died, some still alive, and it is absolutely necessary for Japan to come to terms with this. And I know it is a very deep felt issue here in South Korea. You know, in my country, Timor-Leste, we were invaded, occupied by Japan. And there are women in my country who are also sex slaves. I met some of them in their 80, 90 years old. So these are issues that have to be addressed. But while addressing these issues, setting up a mechanism, truth mechanism, or whatever, they have to look at the longer, medium to longer term, how the three great nations, very different political systems, can come together to lift Asia into the 21st century with their resources, their know-how, their technology, working with India, another giant in the region, to really transform Asia and the world. It is a great invitation, a challenge to the leaders of Japan, of China, and Korea. How can they, in spite of or because of legacies of the past, and while attempting to resolve these emotional issues, how can they work together on a strategic vision for Asia, for Northeast Asia and for Asia? And it is possible. It is a challenge to leaders of the region.
You have been involved in many activities of the United Nations as an advisor and also participant in a very high-level panel for peacekeeping and peace building in various regions in Asia, in the Middle East, and in Africa. What do you think will be the role of the United Nations in this region, especially on the Korean Peninsula, when we are moving towards inter-Korean dialogue, cooperation, and détente? What role can United Nations play in this unfolding process of introducing peace in this part of the world?
Never before the United Nations has faced such extraordinarily complex challenges to its very existence as an effective multilateral body. There are the issues of financing of UN. There are more and more UN demands on the UN for peacekeeping and peace building, particularly in Africa. 70% of UN operations are in Africa. At the same time, we are in an international environment that extremely nefarious for multilateralism, for the UN. The newly elected Secretary General, he's been in office for a year, Mr. Antonio Guterres, served 10 years as the High Commissioner for Refugees. He did a superb job with heart, with compassion, and with wisdom as High Commissioner for Refugees. So he's someone with extraordinary abilities to build bridges and mobilize goodwill for the United Nations. But we can see that in many current complex situations, look at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the UN has a very, very marginal role, if not no role at all. Look at the inter-Korean dialogue going on. Look at the situation in eastern Ukraine with Crimea, Russia. The UN is very marginalized. But that I wouldn't say that that is a major problem. The UN should be where parties involved want it to be. There are situations where two countries in conflict, or three or four in conflict, can come together and resolve the conflict. And there are stages in the process that at some point they will want the UN to be involved. Then the UN will be ready to be involved. So the UN doesn't have to be in every conflict or every attempt at resolving a conflict, as long as countries in the region are able to work out. The UN can provide support in many other ways. One thing is certain. Right now, for instance, in Yemen, one of the worst humanitarian tragedies in the world, it is only the UN that is present as a neutral force to try to mediate between the conflicting parties there, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and local factions in Yemen, to allow humanitarian access to some safe areas in Yemen. And in Mali, if it were not for the UN mobilizing resources and peacekeepers, who would want to be going to Mali? Individual country, France tried to do that, and it was unable to do alone. It had to then bring in the African Union and the United Nations. So the UN continued to be indispensable, but never before in its history it has such a dire financial constraints and operate in a political environment that is not very helpful. The current US administration is obviously, I probably wouldn't say hostile to the UN, but make every effort to bypass the UN, to say the least. And look at Europe. I'm extremely concerned about what's happening in Europe. I have the greatest admiration for the European Union, and I have to say here, I'm also the one who nominated the European Union for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, I repeat in 2010, and I think they got in 2010. Because it was an extraordinary achievement, architecture of peace after World War II, and what the European Union has done for the rest of the world. And the European Union remained today an extraordinary example of countries in conflict, what they can do. But today it's facing, I would say, existential threats. Let's see what's going to happen in Germany now with Chancellor Merkel and the opposition and over the refugees challenge in Europe.
Yeah. Well, I know time is running late, but I would like to open the floor for questions and answers. And please raise your hand and identify yourself and make your question very brief to the point. Please, yes. Please bring the microphone.
My name is Nazira. I'm a student from Seoul National University, and I thank you so much for your speech and what you've been saying. I do agree with everything you have said, and my question is about about the Singapore summit. And as you said, they were mostly focusing on nuclear weapon and denuclearization. They were focusing at it, but they forgot that the human rights, they might forgot that the human rights are important as well. So what do you think that, as you said as well, it should be addressed along with denuclearization? Human rights are important. And what would be your comment on that side? What's the new approaches or what's the bridges to bring the human rights issue as important as a nuclearization? Of course, it might be not that priority, but still it's one of them. And plus, could you please comment on the role of the young people since you start your activity and your human rights history since you were 18 years old? And it was the time that you were very young. And at that time, what was your, what would be for now for the young people, your suggestions, your recommendations? And
all right. Thank
yes,
you.
Thank you.
Maybe we can take one more question, and then you can answer all together. One more question? Yes, the gentleman over there.
大統領閣下、大変ありがとうございました。私は世界中の対立のすべての根源には、世界中の対立のすべての根源には、欲望が存在すると思います。個人間の対立、欲望の対立、あるいは国と国の間の欲望の対立、それらを解決する上で、東アジアの思想が非常に大きな役割を持つのではないかと思うわけです。先ほど閣下はお話の中で、この韓国に無限の可能性を見出すと言われました。このセッションのテーマは普遍的価値であります。その観点から閣下はこの東アジアの思想にどのように評価されるのか、特にここでは仁義礼智信という儒教の5つの価値が、これは韓国だけではなく日本中国も共有しております。私はこの仁義礼智信に代表されるようなアジアの思想がたくさんの対立を解決する上で非常に大きな可能性を持っているのではないか、これに関するコメントを頂戴したいと思います。私は今までにノーベル平和受賞者にお二人お会いしました。その時に親しくお話をし、あるいは対話をする時に常にこの哲学を伺ってまいりました。ぜひコメントをお願いしたいと思います。
Your Excellency Orta, have you understood the second question?
Yeah.
Translated into English?
Yeah.
He's asking if the Confucian culture respecting the ethical relationship among the people could serve as a foundation for a better community in Northeast Asia. So would you like to answer the two questions?
Yeah. On the first question, which I address in my formal remarks, in that as long as we all agree the issue of denuclearization in the Korean Peninsula is an absolute priority. Nevertheless, we cannot lose sight of the situation of human rights in North Korea. However, we also have to understand that when we pursue a goal like the nuclearization, it's extremely complex. Whoever manages this, in this case, President Moon and the government of South Korea, understandably have to pursue incrementally, step by step, very carefully. If and when trust is restored between the two sides and achieve an irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, then maybe it will be time to move to a situation of human rights in North Korea. I don't know the gentleman of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, but I believe that it is possible that under his own leadership, a process of changes start to happen in North Korea, by closing the prison camps, labor camps, ordering the end of torture practices, and we would have to be always very, very careful in dealing with situations like that, pressure is necessary. Maybe it was international pressure, sanctions that brought about the change of heart of Kim Jong-un in regards to the nuclear weapons issue. But we have to take one step at a time. But at the end of the day, denuclearization is not enough if it doesn't involve the freedom of the people of North Korea. And that is a challenge for South Korea, a challenge for the international community, how to achieve both, pursuing denuclearization, but also contributing towards a more humane regime in North Korea. I think I answered your question. So the other, well, if we look at every religion in the world, the main philosophies, the main religions in the world, whether Christianity, whether Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, there is not one that preach violence, preach hatred. We read the Quran, we read the Bible, Torah, we read Confucius, all preach understanding, all preach humanity, values. The problem is when a group of people achieve political power, even they are well versed in all these beliefs, whether Confucius or Hinduism or Buddhism, well, they forget. Look, you know, we all believe that Buddhism is the most peaceful philosophy in the world. But look what some Buddhist monks are doing in Myanmar to the Rohingya. And not only in Myanmar, some in Thailand, extremist Buddhist monks in Thailand that work hand in hand with the extremists in Myanmar. Or look at the Buddhists in Sri Lanka. Hinduism is also a religion of peace. But look at the way some Hindu demagogues in India deal with Muslims in India. People probably don't know, but India has the second largest Muslim population in the world. Number one is Indonesia, number two is India. India has more Muslims than Bangladesh and Pakistan. And in the past, there has been orchestrated violence in India. Of course, it's not sanctioned by the government. The government has been very firm on that, but it has been monks who preach that. So the problem is not with the religions or the philosophies that each society profess, but political leaders or religious leaders that use religion for their own political gains, if at all.
I know you have many more questions, but unfortunately the time is up. And I would like to express my gratitude to President Orta for his insightful views and stimulating discussion on introducing peace and reconciliation and respect for human rights to the world. And Jeju Island especially is a place where the future hope for peace and prosperity is growing, but also Jeju has gone through the past painful experience in the past, and now is in the process of healing the wounds and moving towards reconciliation. And I think President Orta's message certainly has contributed to the moving of history for the new chapter in this island and also on the Korean Peninsula through inter-Korean détente and cooperation. So let's give him a big round of applause for his insightful views and discussion.
Thank you.
Now the meeting is adjourned, and thank you very much for your patience. 여러분 감사합니다. 고맙습니다.
Yes, thank you very much.